Hello and welcome to this presentation on Chapter 23 of Teach Yourself Grammar, which is about relative clauses. First, let's get some context to help us understand what relative clauses are. Well, first, they are subordinate clauses, and in the last chapter we discussed content subordinate clauses, which are nominal in function, and their most common role, as we saw, is to be either a verb or a noun complement. In this chapter we're going to study relative clauses, which are also subordinate clauses, but these have an adjectival function, and their most common role is going to be a noun or nominal modifier. Just remember, every subordinate clause is headed by a subordinating conjunction, and that's the dead giveaway, the clue that you should look for in trying to locate subordinate clauses. And unfortunately, there is some overlap here between content and relative clauses. So what we're really going to have to focus on to tell the difference between the two is the role that they are playing in the sentence. So the content clause, again, is going to be a complement, and the relative clause is going to be a modifier. With a bit of practice, you're going to recognize the difference between them right away, but it does take a little bit of practice before you can do that. So let's dive right in. Let's define relative clauses. So these are adjectival subordinate clauses formed with a relative conjunction. These are who, whose, whom, which, or that. And again, as we've seen with other types of conjunctions, these can sometimes be omitted. The most common role that the relative clause plays is that of the noun phrase post modifier. Let's take a look at some examples. So first we begin with two independent clauses. Independent clause 1, I saw a movie. Independent clause 2, the movie was good, can be combined so that we see the relative clause being underlined in the far right column, and the omittable conjunction is going to be in brackets. So the movie that I saw was good, which can also be the movie I saw was good. When we have the clause, she knows a director, and the independent clause 2 being the director is famous, we're going to have the director whom she knows is famous, or the director she knows is famous. And thirdly, we do have somewhat more complicated situations, scenarios, and there we might have something like, we stayed at a hotel, and the hotel was fancy, in which case we could get the hotel which we stayed at was fancy, or the hotel we stayed at was fancy. And then the second version of that, the hotel at which we stayed was fancy, in which case the subordinating conjunction which cannot be omitted. So let's take a look at how to form relative clauses. As we saw in the previous example, we begin with two independent clauses that share a topic. That topic may typically be something like the same noun, so that we have the clauses I saw a movie and the movie was good, obviously sharing that same noun, movie. And then we drop one clause into the other right after the shared topic. So we simply take I saw a movie and we drop it in immediately after the shared topic, which is the movie. And that then becomes the movie I saw a movie was good. Next, we substitute the correct conjunction for the same shared topic. So that becomes the movie I saw that was good. And finally, we just move the conjunction to the initial position in the relative clause, the movie that I saw was good. And there then you can see that that conjunction forms a kind of a signal that lets us know that we are going to have a relative subordinate clause next. So something to look out for is that when the shared noun is possessive, which means that it's going to act as a determiner, or when it's the object of a preposition, then the conjunction can bring along the head of that particular phrase. So in the other example we saw, we stayed at a hotel and the hotel was fancy, which can become the hotel at which we stayed was fancy. Now we have at which and not just which being moved to the initial position in that relative clause. So if you want to think of it this way, it brings along the preposition, and in that case that preposition is at. A second example, I read the actor's bio, the actor was famous, can become the actor whose bio I read was famous. And so in that example, you're going to see that it's whose bio and not just whose that is moved to the initial position in the relative clause. So in this case, the conjunction brings along the noun. So let's take a look at distinguishing between relative and content clauses. Starting with an example. I know who ate the last slice versus the person who ate the last slice felt guilty. So you're going to notice that these two clauses have a very similar appearance. In fact, they are basically identical. Who ate the last slice is exactly the same in both of these contexts, but they're playing different roles. So how can we distinguish between them? Well, we have to remember that content clauses are going to be nominal, and they're almost always complements, whereas relative clauses are adjectival, and these are always modifiers. Keeping that in mind, if we look at the sentence, I know who ate the last slice, then we can see that this has the underlying form, I know something. And something, namely, who ate the last slice, completes the meaning of the verb to know. In the person who ate the last slice felt guilty, we have the underlying form, the person felt guilty. And in that case, who ate the last slice is an optional modifier and can be cut. The difference between noun complement and noun modifier can be very tricky. For example, in the fact that I ate the last slice annoyed him, the fact and that I ate the last slice can both be completed by annoyed him. And so this is how we can tell that in the fact that I ate the last slice, we are dealing with a content clause, that I ate the last slice, which completes the meaning of a noun, the fact, right? And the way that we can tell that is because both the fact and that I ate the last slice can be completed with by annoyed him. So the fact annoyed him and that I ate the last slice annoyed him. In the person who ate the last slice felt guilty, only the person, but not who ate the last slice, can be completed by felt guilty. So the person felt guilty, but not who ate the last slice felt guilty. That last one wouldn't really work. So let's turn to a question of usage, namely, how to punctuate restrictive relative clauses versus non-restrictive relative clauses. And here it's important to remember that modifiers in general can provide more information about what they're modifying, or they can restrict it. As an example, let's take the adjective red. So I can have a sentence like, the shoes are red, and this just provides more information about the shoes, namely that they are red. But I can also have a sentence such as, the red shoes are on sale, and this essentially restricts which shoes are on sale, only the red ones. Brown shoes, black shoes, and shoes of other color presumably are not on sale. And we simply use commas to clarify whether a relative clause is restrictive or non-restrictive. So non-restrictive clauses are set off with paired commas, and restrictive ones are not. For example, in the sentence, the students who studied hard did well on the homework, I have a non-restrictive clause. The implication here is that all the students that I'm talking about studied hard and they all did well on the homework. By contrast, the sentence, the students who studied hard did well on the homework, implies that there are some students who did not study hard and, therefore maybe they did not do so well on the homework. So this is an instance where we have a restrictive clause. It's only the students who studied hard that I'm talking about, and in that instance we're not going to use commas to set that off. Okay, so let's review the three major points that we've covered. First, relative clauses are adjectival subordinate clauses, and as such they are modifiers. They can be easy to confuse with content clauses, which, however, are complements. So, to distinguish between them, you simply have to remember the different behavior of each kind of clause. One is going to, again, be a modifier, and the other a complement. And finally, we use commas to set off non-restrictive relative clauses, and we do not use commas for restrictive relative clauses. So that's a point of usage that comes in handy when you're writing papers.